Chapter 34. The Last Village. It was dark by the time they reached Carrisford. It had been 3 days since Goad, 2 since Pater, and a day since the woman in the stable, yet it seemed like a lifetime ago. The village appeared normal, but they still worried about what could be hidden. Matt sat in the road and protested walking any further unless there was a warm place to sleep at the end. Rand saw mounds in the dark field and pointed out the haystacks as a place to sleep. Grumbling, Matt followed him into the field and they burrowed into the hay to get comfortable. Heroes in stories never seemed to sleep in haystacks or under hedges. Rand couldn't pretend he was a hero in a story anymore. Softly, Matt asked if they would make it to Camelin, and Rand told him that they'll arrive the day after tomorrow. Cynically, Matt said, "If there aren't 100 dark friends waiting for us down the road, or a fade or two, I think we're the last ones left, Rand. Whatever it's all about, it's just us two now. Just us." He sounded frightened, but Rand was tired and told him to go to sleep. They woke at dawn, and as they crawled out, pulling straw from their clothes, they saw the road full of travellers heading toward Camelin, mostly young men. Matt called out to ask where they were all bound, and a young lad shouted back, "To Camelin! To see the false dragon, just like you!" They joined the throng, getting the same answer from most people they spoke to. Merchant wagons and farmers' carts struggled with the congestion on the road, and were in no mood to give rides to anyone. The wagon drivers were free with their whips, and when one caught Rand on his eyebrow, it terrified him at how close he'd come to losing an eye. He had to stop Matt shooting the arrow he'd knocked and aimed at the man, pointing out the guards with the wagon. The Queen's guards patrolled the road, and to the frustration of the farmers, told them that the people had the right to use the road. Unless they broke any laws, there was nothing they could do about them. Anyway, they should see the numbers in Camelin. The boys hoped the numbers would dissuade any dark friends from trying anything, and make it easier to hide. Their stomachs rumbled constantly as they had no money left for food. Their original tactic of asking farmers for food in return for work wasn't possible now. The farmers patrolled their lands with pitchforks and dogs, making it clear no one was welcome. In each village they passed, the villagers watched them stony-faced. At dusk they reached a town, and most of the travellers went either to the inns if they could afford it, or found fields and hedges to sleep in. Rand and Matt kept going, making the most of having the road almost to themselves. Rand's body ached all over, but he gritted his teeth and pushed on, while Matt made his feelings very clear. Late in the evening they arrived at the next village, and Matt insisted that they rest, stopping outside an inn and sitting in the shadows. A horse and cart stood outside with a man checking the harnesses. Near the door to the inn, 2 men were talking, and Rand got an uneasy feeling about them. He noticed the man by the cart seemed to be put on edge by them too, and was now making a show of rechecking the harnesses, trying not to watch the pair. Eventually one of the men walked off, appearing to be wrapped in shadows, as the other stood sweating and wringing his hands. Rand's eyes followed the departing figure, and a brief moment in the light of a window made Rand gasp. "Fade!" He silenced whatever Matt was going to say as he watched the half-man fade away. The cartman called out, "Strange friends in the dark for an innkeeper." The sweating man jumped and responded sharply. "What do you mean by that, Almond Bunt?" Bunt told him. "Just what I said, Holdwyn. Strange friends. He's not from around here, is he? Awful lot of odd folk coming through these last few weeks." Holdwyn told Bunt he was a fine one to talk, going off to Camelin to see the false dragon. His friend is from 4 Kings and is looking for a pair of thieves who stole his heron-marked sword. Rand caught his breath at this and exchanged a look with Matt, who was pressed flat against the wall, eyes wide with fear. Bunt exclaimed that no wonder he wants the sword back if it's heron-marked. Holdwyn explained that he's a rich man, and the boys are telling wild stories, stirring up people, and their dark friends, followers of Logain. Bunt repeated Holdwyn's description, but there was a mocking tone to it. Holdwyn told him they were around 20 years old, and there's a bounty of 100 gold crowns for their capture. They're vicious, sly liars, so it's probably best if Bunt stays clear of them. If he sees them, just let him know, and he can summon his friend. Holdwyn had been getting more and more animated as he described them, until suddenly he declared he was wasting his time talking to Bunt, and asked if he was still going to Camelin. Bunt told him there would most likely not be another false dragon to see before he dies. If he leaves now, he'll have the road to himself. After Holdwyn stormed into the inn, Rand stood up, but as he headed forward, Matt caught his arm and asked if he was crazy. He might recognise them. Rand asked if he'd rather stay in a town where they know there's a fade and they won't get far on foot. He walked over to Bunt, startling the man. He told Bunt that he'd overheard he was going to Camelin. Could they get a ride with him? They're going to see the false dragon too. Bunt agreed and shooed them into the cart. They made good time and soon discovered that Bunt loved to talk, whether they listened or not. He asked if they'd ever been to Camelin before. Wait until they see it. It's the most magnificent city in the world. Better than Ebudar and Ilion. Queen Morgase is the light of Camelin and Andor, though he does wish he'd get rid of the Tar Valon witch. Rand asked if he meant an Aes Sedai, and Bunt said what else would he mean? Her name is Elida, and she has far too much influence over the Queen, who shouldn't be a Tar Valon puppet. Rand wondered if Moraine would go to her sister Aes Sedai when she got to Camelin. Maybe she could help them. Matt could read his expression and shook his head. They lay back in silence, listening to Bunt talk about the weather, ravens everywhere, dark strangers, and how the Queen should be doing something about it, taking the boy's silence as agreement. Rand sat up to look out into the darkness. Shadows and shapes seemed to writhe in the dark, so he lay back down before his imagination could convince him something was there. Bunt told him about the tradition of the Daughter-Heir training with the Aes Sedai in Tar Valon, and the first prince with the warders. He told them about the previous first prince, Luck, son of the old queen who died in the Blight. His sister, the Daughter-Heir, Tigraine, vanished and is presumed dead, though some say she's still alive and the true queen, but they're bloody fools. Her husband, Tarangale Damodred, a Cairienan royal, never acted like he grieved. When the old queen died, she'd had no heir, so it led to a succession. Tarangale got Cairien involved in Andor's politics, determined to marry the next queen and become the prince consort. It led to Lamon cutting down the tree, which in turn led to the Aiel War. Morgase won the succession and married Tarangale, who died a few years later, but thankfully he'd fathered the Lady Elaine and Lord Gawain by then. It's time to stop the tradition of sending them to Tar Valon for training. There's plenty of other places like Shienar, Ilion and Tyr. They can all teach them what they need to know to rule. Queen Morgase can rule Andor without Tar Valon interference. Rand fell asleep as the farmer rambled on, and dreamt of drinking tea with Tam, talking about Daughter-Heirs and the Aiel. The dream switched to Winter Night, except it was Tom on the litter as he dragged it through the westward, telling him that the Queen is wed to the land, but the dragon is one with the land. A fade appeared in the distance, carrying the heads of Lan and Moraine, while dragging Mat, Perrin and Egwene in chains. Rand shouted, "No! Not her! It's me you want!" Egwene burst into flame, crumbling into dust and ash, as Tom kept up his recitation. Rand screamed and opened his eyes, finding himself in a cart with a raven on his chest. "You are mine!" it squawked, then pecked out his eyeball. With a shriek, Rand woke to daylight and still in the cart. As he checked his eye was all right, Bunt turned and asked if he was awake. His shrieking had given him a fright. Matt complained that he hadn't been able to sleep as Bunt talked all night. Bunt pointed ahead and told the boys that they'd arrived. Camelin, the greatest city in the world. Thanks for listening. Please like, share and subscribe and help get a new channel off the ground. Thank you.